Well, it's a very exciting Thursday. Super Rugby Week 10 is just around the corner, and it's a long weekend. I'm joined in studio by our sport editor, Garrin, and chief writer, Rob, and we're going to be talking about Week 10. So all three games are on Saturday, right, guys?
Good morning, Jen. That's correct.
Okay, we're talking Week 10. Saturday, Game 1. Garrin, why don't you take us through your predictions, which were all correct last week.
Correct. So we're hoping to do the same as last week. We're getting much, much better, I like to think. So the first game is the Bulls. They're in Australia now, the third game of their 4-match tour. They're in Sydney. They're taking on the Waratahs. And again, unfortunately, they've lost their first two games, and I think they're going to make it 3 out of 3. The Bulls, the third week is always notoriously the toughest on tour. They've now left New Zealand in Australia. Yeah. Got the Waratahs, who are smarting after defeat last week. They've slipped a little bit in the Australian conference, but they've got Israel Folau back, their fullback, who was controversially pulled out at the last minute last week. He's the leading try scorer. He'll add something in attack for the Waratahs. I think the Bulls are going to fall a little bit short, again, like they've been in their first two matches. It's been fairly competitive. They just seem to have lacked that little bit extra at the end to pull through. I'm going with the Waratahs by about 3 or 4 points. I think the Bulls will pick up a losing bonus point, but I don't think they'll have enough to pick up their first victory on tour.
Sad face. Rob, do you agree?
Not great for me either. I'm going to go Waratahs by about 7. So perhaps with the Bulls again getting a losing bonus point, although we're getting to that situation where you can't keep banking losing bonus points all the time. You have to start winning if you want to make progress on the table. It's going to be, I think it could be a sort of almost a forward purist game, if you like. People who like grinding, hard forward play, because the Waratahs pack is very physical. The Bulls will quite like coming up against a physical eight. It might almost bring the best out of them as well. But I still think that the Waratahs might just have a few too many guns. I mean, their tight five, as you know, Garrin, is pretty strong and uncompromising, so they'll certainly match the Bulls at the very least in the set phases. Victor Matfield playing again, as he's being forced to, of course, because the Bulls badly need an iconic figure like him to try to sort of get some momentum going. But just because they haven't won yet, and I think they had great chances to win against the Highlanders and blew it, it's difficult to sort of suddenly be tipping the Bulls. It's certainly not impossible. I mean, I think we both agree that they could win the game, but I just think also they're going to get cleaned up on the floor. I think it's a big problem that Michael Hooper is a specialist fetcher in the Waratahs team, and he could have a field day against a very upright Bulls pack who still haven't sorted out that fetcher issue. So for me, fairly clear-cut Waratahs win, I'm afraid.
Well, your predictions all go really well when you bet against the South African team. So I'm sure that one is going to be correct. But the next two are derbies, so you have to pick a South African team. So that's good.
That's the good news. The other two games are, we're going to have a South African winner at least. So it should be at least 2 out of 3 that matches this weekend, which will be our best return to date, which is frightening in itself. But the first game at 3 o'clock, it's in Durban. It's the Sharks against the Cheetahs. I think Rob and I are going to agree on the result here, the Sharks' victory, but I'm going for a fairly close match. I've got a funny feeling that the Cheetahs, who in the last couple of games have sort of been blown away in the last 20 minutes of the match, it looked like their fitness wasn't holding out for them. The New Zealand team seemed to get stronger at altitude in Bloemfontein, and they sort of ran away with the matches in the last 20 minutes or so. I think the Cheetahs will be more competitive in Durban, down at the coast. They've got Heinrich Rousseau back at flank, which I think is key for them. They've lacked a little bit, but he brings not only Super Rugby experience, but Springbok experience as well. I think they'll be competitive. There's never been any love lost between the Cheetahs and the Sharks. The Sharks rather in the past have poached a lot of the players from Grey Bloem, so it's a bit of a return game for a couple of them. Some familiar faces. The Sharks have been really, really good so far this season, even though not having played a full 80 minutes of top-class rugby. I think the Cheetahs are going to exploit them a little bit. I think they'll be competitive at least for the majority of the match. And I see the Sharks winning, again, just because of this home ground advantage that we've talked about in the past. But I wouldn't be surprised if it's as low as like 3 or 4 points. I think Rob's going to go for more for the Sharks, but at least we're going for the same winners.
So I'm nodding sagely.
Yes.
Yeah,
yes.
It's going to be 10 points, I think, Jen. I think the Sharks will win it in a reasonably clear-cut way, even if it's fairly close for a while. I'm not denying that it might be a very competitive game for 60 or 70 minutes even, but I still think that the Sharks have got the intensity, got the hunger to put the Cheetahs away fairly smartly if they really have their wits about them. A couple of little variables, Garrin, that, you mentioned Heinrich Rousseau being back. Obviously, he's a little bit undercooked. I think he's had one Vodacom Cup game where he did pretty well, and that was what was the catalyst for him to get picked by the Cheetahs. I'm not sure if they'll get a full sort of 80 minutes minutes of sort of full energy from him. We'll have to see how that goes. But the Sharks also, the one little worry for me perhaps would be the fact that they've got the still very inexperienced Tim Sweel playing at fly half. They've decided to keep Frans Steyn at inside centre. Of course, that could change. If things are going pear-shaped, he could always move back to fly half Frans Steyn and really impose himself. And Tonderai Shivanga, quite an interesting selection also for the Sharks. We know that he's a very fast wing, a bit of a sort of journeyman these days, but the worry with Tondi is always that when he gets into full steam, whether that hamstring is going to snap at full pace. Presumably they think that he's fit enough to cut it again in Super Rugby. So a couple of little sort of interesting tweaks. I'm not saying they'll be for the worst for the Sharks, because Jake White is a shrewd planner. But yeah, Sharks fairly comfortably.
All right, and moving on to game 3.
Well, the last game, 5+5 kickoff down in Cape Town. It's the Stormers against the Lions. Now, if the Stormers were ever going to win a game, or their second game only of the season, it's this one. The Lions arrive with a number of injuries. They haven't named their team yet, but all we've heard is at least 5 or 6 players from their normal starting 15 won't be travelling down to Cape Town. So they're going to be under strength for sure. The Stormers have named their side, and rather interestingly, I think, Rob, they've named Peter Grant at fullback. Now, Alistair Coetzee, the coach, said he has played 15 before in Japan and at Marty's when he was at varsity. So I don't know if that's a good thing or a bad thing, but it's so long ago, I'm not sure if he remembers where to even stand at fullback. You know, it smacks a little bit of desperation for me. You know, Dimitri Katrakilis is going to start at fly-half. I don't think he's had a great season at all. I don't think Peter Grant's been that spectacular either, but now they've got both of them in the team at the same time. Yeah. So they're going to be, Patrick Katrakilis is going to be kicking for posts, so it frees up Peter Grant to sort of play a more roving, attacking game, hopefully from fullback. Whether he's any better than Jaco Tata, I'm not too sure. We'll have to wait and see. But, you know, at home, the Stormers with a crowd, the faithful, Newton's faithful behind them, I expect them to get up and win. Again, nothing would shock me this season, unfortunately, for the Stormers. You know, they've only won one game. It was at Newton's against the Hurricanes, but it was a pretty close game at that. Yeah. So I'm going with the home side to win, you know, with not a lot of certainty. Again, I wouldn't be surprised if the Lions shock them like they sort of did in the first match up in Ellis Park earlier in the year. But Stormers by 5 or 6, with fingers crossed.
All right, Rob, do you agree?
Yeah, I think we're pretty spot on with that one. I think we both think that the Lions might be worth a losing bonus point. Of course, the Lions might be worth a win as well. Neither of us is particularly confident about the Stormers. And the first round game, let's not forget, at Ellis Park on the opening day of the season for the Stormers was a terrible back foot game for them, because they was it 34-10, I think, Garrin, that they lost at Ellis Park. So that's 24 points to try and turn around. I know things are a lot different when you play later in the season and you play. You know, the Stormers will enjoy playing at Newlands. Home advantage could be a critical factor. The weather looks set fair, so a bit of pressure on the Stormers to sort of reinvent themselves. Jean de Villiers has spoken sort of quite enthusiastically about the changes that they're making strategically, tactically, just mentally, trying to get into a sort of more of a sort of winning space again. And I just think that desperation factor should get the Stormers across the line.
All right, guys. Well, I hope you both have a great long weekend. Garrin, just remind our audience how they can share their photos and check out the live update.
Sure. If you're going to any of the matches this long Easter weekend, please send us your pictures to mysport@sport24.co.za. We'd love to include them in our gallery. And take a look at our Super Rugby predictions, challenge us, and see how you do this weekend. Good luck.